In the richest streets of Abuja, Madame Ioma Okuri was known as a woman of power, a woman whose name could build empires and silence rooms. But behind her luxury lived a secret she buried for 23 years. A baby girl she abandoned. A child she believed was gone forever. Now, fate has returned that child to her doorstep. Not as a daughter, but as a maid. Before we continue, if you're new to this channel, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. In the beautiful neighborhoods of Abuja, where mansions stood behind tall gates and the streets were lined with tall trees that whispered in the wind, Madame Ioma Okuri ruled like a queen. Her name carried weight. People didn't just mention her casually. They spoke of her in careful tones, the way people speak of fire. Something powerful, something admirable, but also something that could burn you if you got too close. At 50 years old, Madame Ioma was one of the most successful businesswomen in the capital. She owned one of the largest real estate companies in Nigeria's Federal Capital Territory. She built estates where others saw empty land. She turned dusty plots into shining empires. To young women she was a dream. To investors she was a force. To competitors she was a storm. Always dressed with sharp elegance, her clothes looked like they belonged on magazine covers. Her perfume was soft but expensive, the kind that lingered long after she passed. Her jewelry was simple but refined, never too loud, yet always commanding attention. Madame Ioma Okuri was the definition of prestige. But inside her, there was silence. A silence so heavy it could be felt in the air. Her villa in Maitama was spotless, quiet and perfect. Too perfect. The floors were polished marble that reflected light like water. The curtains were always arranged neatly. Every chair was placed at the exact angle. Every flower in every vase stood as if it had been trained. The house was not just clean, it was controlled. Even the staff walked carefully, as if the walls could hear their footsteps and report them. The housekeepers spoke in whispers. The cooks avoided unnecessary noise. Nobody laughed too loudly. Nobody made careless mistakes. Because Madame Ioma did not tolerate disorder. One misplaced cushion could earn a cold stare. One late arrival could bring a sharp warning. Her heels clicking across the marble corridor was enough to make the entire house tense. Grace, her personal assistant for over 10 years, knew the rules better than anyone. With Madame Ioma you obeyed. You didn't argue. You didn't ask too many questions. You did your job. And stayed invisible. People often wondered why Madame Ioma never married. Why she never had children. Why such a powerful woman lived in such loneliness. But nobody dared to ask her. Because some questions were dangerous. Some answers were buried for a reason. And Madame Ioma had buried hers deeper than anyone could imagine. But at night, when the city outside quieted down, when the lights in the villa dimmed, when the staff retired into their small quarters and sleep covered the mansion like a blanket, Madame Ioma stopped being the woman of marble. She became someone else. She would climb the stairs slowly, her steps softer than they were in the daytime. She would enter her dressing room, surrounded by expensive gowns and shining shoes. Then she would kneel, not in prayer, but in memory. At the very bottom of her closet, behind boxes of old handbags and forgotten files, was a hidden compartment. Secret place. A place no one knew existed. With trembling fingers, she would pull out a small silver box. It was not expensive. It did not match her wealth. But it was the most precious thing she owned. Her hands would pause for a moment, as if even touching it was painful. Then she would open it slowly. Inside was a faded photograph. A newborn baby. Teeny. Fragile. Wrapped in a soft cloth. The baby's eyes were closed, unaware of the world's cruelty. Madame Ioma's breath would always catch when she saw it. Her fingers would stroke the picture gently, like she was touching skin. Her voice, usually firm and commanding, became small, broken. "My little angel." That was all she ever said. Sometimes her lips trembled. Sometimes her eyes filled with tears. And in those moments, the powerful businesswoman disappeared. All that remained was a mother. A mother who had lost something she could never replace. No matter how many houses she built. No matter how many contracts she signed. No matter how many millions entered her accounts. Nothing filled that empty space. She would sit there for long minutes, staring at the baby's face like she was trying to bring the past back to life. Then, as if she suddenly remembered who she was supposed to be, she would wipe her cheeks quickly. She would close the silver box. She would lock it away. And she would put her mask back on. The mask of Madame Okuri, the woman who never showed weakness. But the truth was, Madame Ioma had not always been this cold. There was a time long ago when she was young, when she loved, when she dreamed of a family. But something happened. A mistake, fear. A decision made under pressure. A decision that changed everything. The date was burned into her memory like fire. May 12, 2001. That was the day she lost her child. That was the day her life split into two. Before and after. And now, 23 years later, she believed the past was dead, buried, gone forever. She didn't know that fate was already walking toward her gate. Quietly, softly, disguised. Soon, the child she thought was lost would return, not as a daughter, but as a stranger. The rain fell gently that morning in Abuja. Not the heavy kind of rain that floods the roads, but the soft, persistent kind that made the city look washed and quiet, as if the skies were whispering secrets to the earth. Inside the Okuri mansion in Maitama, everything was as usual. The floors were shining. The air smelled of fresh polish and expensive perfume. The staff moved like shadows, careful not to disturb the silence Madame Ioma loved. Then the housekeeper, Mama Abe, hurried into the hallway, adjusting her wrapper nervously. She knocked lightly on Madame's office door. "Madame." Was. Then the cold voice answered. "Yes." Mama Abe leaned in respectfully. "The new maid has arrived." Madame Ioma did not look up immediately. She continued signing documents, her pen moving with sharp precision. Only after a long moment did she say, "Bring her." Mama Abe stepped aside, and the young woman entered. She was about 23 years old, modestly dressed in a simple worn gown and a scarf that covered her hair. Rainwater still clung to her shoulders. In her hand was a small bag, the kind that looked like it held a person's entire life. She stood straight, even in her simplicity. There was dignity in her posture. There was calmness in her eyes. "My name is Awa," she said softly. Her voice was gentle but not weak. Madame Ioma finally raised her gaze. For a second, something flickered in her eyes. Something unreadable. Then the marble mask returned. "You have worked as a maid before?" she asked in a neutral tone. "Yes, madam," Awa replied. "Can you cook?" "A little." Madame Ioma nodded slowly. "Then listen carefully. I do not like noise. I do not like delays. I do not like mistakes." Awa bowed her head slightly. "Yes, madam." Mama Abe watched quietly. She had seen many girls come and go. Some were careless. Some were lazy. Some were too curious. But this one was different. There was something about her presence that made the air feel softer. Awa was taken to the servant quarters behind the mansion, near the laundry room. Her room was small. A narrow bed, tiny shelf, a window that barely allowed light. But Awa did not complain. She placed her bag down gently. Inside the bag, hidden beneath folded clothes, was a small red pearl necklace tied in a cloth. She touched it briefly like a habit. Then she whispered to herself, "Help me, God." And she began her work. From the very first day, Awa moved with unusual care. She swept the floors as if she respected them. She washed dishes as if they were sacred. She cleaned corners other maids often ignored. And she did everything silently. No gossip, no laughter, no unnecessary words. It was almost as if she was trying to disappear. Days passed, and something strange became clear. Awa never made mistakes. Madame Ioma's breakfast was always perfect. Tea was never too hot, never too cold. The plates were arranged exactly the way Madame liked. Even Grace, the personal assistant, began to notice. One morning, Grace whispered to Mama Abe, "This girl, she's too precise." Mama Abe only replied softly, "Some people work with their hands. Others work with their spirit." Madame Ioma noticed too. She didn't praise easily. But one morning as she entered the dining room, she paused. The smell of coffee filled the air. The table was arranged beautifully. Awa stood nearby with her hands folded. Madame Ioma stared for a moment. "Did you prepare this?" "Yes, madam." A long silence. Then Madame Ioma said something rare. "Good." Just one word. But in that house it was like gold. Awa lowered her head respectfully. "Thank you, madam." As the weeks went on, Awa became a quiet presence in the mansion. Always polite. Always careful. Always calm. But what troubled Madame Ioma was not the girl's work. It was the feeling. Whenever Awa entered a room, something in Madame's chest eased. A tension she carried without knowing seemed to loosen. Sometimes Madame would look up from her laptop and find herself staring at the young maid. The shape of her face. The softness of her eyes. The way she bit her lower lip when thinking. It was familiar. Too familiar. Madame would quickly look away, annoyed at herself. "Focus," she would whisper. But the feeling remained. One evening, Madame Ioma was working late in her office. The rain had returned, tapping gently on the windows. The house was quiet, and a melody floated through the corridor. Low, almost like a ghost. Lullaby. Madame's fingers froze on her keyboard. Her breath stopped. Impossible. She hadn't heard it in decades. Her heart began to pound. Slowly she stood up. The melody continued, drifting from the kitchen. Madame walked out, her heels no longer clicking sharply. They moved softly now, like a woman walking into memory. She reached the kitchen doorway. And there was Awa, washing dishes unaware. Her lips hummed gently as her hands worked. The lullaby was the same. The exact same one. The one Madame Ioma had sung to her baby 23 years ago. On the only night she held her child. Madame's hands trembled. Her voice came out like a whisper. "Awa!" Awa turned quickly, startled. "Yes, madam." Madame swallowed hard. "Where did you learn that song?" Awa blinked in surprise. "My mother sang it to me," she answered softly. "She said it was a song of comfort." Madame Ioma's face drained of color. A heavy silence fell. Awa looked confused. "Is something wrong, madam?" Madame forced herself to breathe. She nodded slowly. "No, nothing." Then she turned away. She walked back down the corridor like a woman trying not to run. Her heart was no longer calm. That night, Madame Ioma lay awake in her large bed, staring at the ceiling. The rain continued outside. But inside her mind, another storm had begun. My mother sang it to me. How? Why? Who was this girl? And why did her presence feel like something she had lost? For the first time in years, Madame Ioma felt afraid. Not of business, not of enemies, but of the past. Because something she thought was buried was starting to breathe again. And deep down, she already knew. This was not coincidence. This was destiny knocking softly at her door. The weeks that followed were strange. Not loud, not dramatic, just strange. In the Okuri mansion, everything remained polished and perfect on the outside. Breakfast was served on time. Meetings continued. Contracts were signed. Madame Ioma still walked with her usual authority. Her heels still clicked across the marble floors. Her voice still carried command. But inside her, something had shifted. Awa's presence had become like a quiet wind moving through a house of stone. Madame could not explain it. She only knew that the silence in her chest was no longer empty. It was restless. Some nights, she caught herself listening for Awa's footsteps. Some mornings, she found herself watching the girl's hands as she worked. And always in the back of her mind, That lullaby echoed like a ghost. Mama Abe, the old housekeeper, noticed too. Mama Abe had served in that mansion for nearly 20 years. She had watched Madame Ioma build walls around herself. Walls of discipline. Walls of pride. Walls of control. But now, those walls were trembling. One afternoon, while the staff were busy cleaning, Mama Abe entered the servant quarters. She was checking rooms as she always did, making sure everything was neat. Oa was not there. She had gone to the market with another maid. Mama Abe moved quietly, folding a blanket that had been left untidy. Then she noticed Awa's small bag sitting open near the bed. Something inside it caught her eye. Cloth bundle. Carefully tied. Mama Abe hesitated. It was not her habit to pry. But something in her spirit stirred. She reached out slowly and untied the cloth. And there it was. A small red pearl necklace. Worn with time. The pearls were no longer shining brightly, but they carried history. Mama Abe's breath caught. She stared at it like it was a living thing. 'Cause she recognized it. Not from today. Not from this house. But from long ago. From the day Madame Ioma had broken. Mama Abe's hands trembled as she held the necklace. Her voice came out like a whisper. Ah! She remembered the story. The hidden sorrow. The child that was never spoken of. Mama Abe sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. Her heart heavy. This was not ordinary. This was not coincidence. This was destiny. After a long moment, she stood up and wrapped the necklace carefully in the cloth again. Then she walked toward Madame Ioma's office. Each step felt heavier than the last. She knocked softly. Madam. Yes. Mama Abe entered slowly. Madame Ioma was seated behind her desk, reading documents. She looked up with her usual sharpness. What is it? Mama Abe swallowed. I found something while tidying. Madame Ioma's eyes narrowed slightly. What did you find? Mama Abe opened the cloth gently. The necklace appeared. For 1 second. Nothing happened. Then Madame Ioma froze. Her face drained of color. Her breath stopped completely. The room seemed to shrink. Slowly she reached for it, as if afraid it might vanish. Her fingers touched the pearls. And her whole body trembled. She knew it. She knew it the way a mother knows her child's cry in a crowd. This necklace. She had placed it around her baby's neck. 23 years ago. On the night before that baby was taken away. Her lips parted. No sound came. Then finally her voice broke like glass. Where did you get this? Mama Abe lowered her head. It was in Awa's things, madam. Madame Ioma's hands shook harder now. Awa! Mama Abe nodded slowly. Madame Ioma's throat tightened. Her eyes burned. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping behind her. Awa! She whispered almost to herself. Mama Abe hesitated. Madam, do you think? Madame Ioma cut her off sharply. Leave. Mama Abe stepped back quickly. Yes, madam. She left the office quietly, closing the door. Inside, Madame Ioma remained standing, staring at the necklace like it was a wound reopened. Her mind raced. Impossible. It couldn't be. And yet, how else? She gripped the pearls tightly. Her breath came uneven. Memories flooded her. Hospital room. A newborn cry. Her mother's harsh voice. This child is shame. Forget it. The nurse carrying the baby away. Her own helpless scream swallowed by fear. Madame Ioma's knees weakened. She sat down slowly, clutching the necklace to her chest. Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not until she knew. That evening, Awa returned from the market, unaware. She greeted Madame politely as she passed in the corridor. Good evening, Madame. Madame Ioma stared at her. For a long moment, Awa paused. Is something wrong? Madame Ioma forced her face into calmness. No. Go. Awa nodded and walked away. But Madame's eyes followed her like someone watching a miracle they were afraid to believe. That night Madame Ioma did not sleep. The mansion was silent, but her mind was screaming. She sat on the edge of her bed, holding the necklace. Her voice trembled in the darkness. My God! She swallowed hard. Could it be? Could the child she lost, the child she mourned in silence, be living under her roof? She pressed the necklace against her lips. Her tears finally fell. Quiet. Unstoppable. The next morning she made a decision. She called Grace, her assistant. Grace arrived quickly, holding her tablet. Madam, you sent for me? Madame Ioma closed her office door. Her voice was low, firm, dangerous. I need something done. Grace frowned. Yes, madam. Madam hesitated for a moment, then said the words that changed everything. I want a DNA test. Grace blinked. A DNA test. Madame Ioma nodded slowly. No one must know. Grace's confusion deepened. With who? Madame Ioma's eyes lifted. Her voice was almost a whisper. With Awa. Grace froze. The tablet nearly slipped from her hands. Madam, are you saying? Madame Ioma cut her off sharply. Just do it. Grace swallowed. Yes, madam. As Grace left the office, Madame Ioma sank back into her chair. Her heart was pounding like thunder. The past was no longer buried. It was standing in her house, wearing a maid's uniform, waiting for truth to speak. Soon, everything would change. The waiting was unbearable. 3 days felt like 3 years. Madame Ioma Okuri continued her life as if nothing had changed. She attended meetings. She signed documents. She spoke to investors with the same sharp confidence. But inside, her heart was no longer steady. Every sound in the mansion made her tense. Every time Awa passed by, her chest tightened. She would watch the girl from a distance, her mind screaming questions her lips could not speak. Is it possible? Could fate be so cruel? Or so merciful? Grace, her assistant, moved quietly through the house, arranging everything for the test without drawing attention. A strand of hair from Awa's comb. A sample from Madame's own brush. Everything done carefully, secretly, silently, because some truths were too heavy to announce before they were confirmed. And then, on the third morning, the envelope arrived. It was plain, ordinary, but it carried the weight of 23 years. Grace placed it on Madame Ioma's desk without saying a word. Madame stared at it for a long time. Her office was quiet. The city outside continued living. Cars moved. Birds sang. Life went on. Unaware that inside this room, a woman's world was about to collapse. Grace spoke softly. Madam, do you want me to stay? Madame Ioma swallowed hard. No. Grace hesitated, then nodded. Yes, madam. She left, closing the door gently. Now Madame Ioma was alone. Her fingers hovered over the envelope. Her hands trembled. She had opened billion-naira contracts without fear. She had faced courtrooms, rivals, boardrooms full of powerful men, without blinking. But this small envelope, terrified her. Slowly she tore it open. The paper inside felt heavier than it should. Her eyes scanned the lines quickly. Medical words, percentages, scientific language. And her eyes stopped. Mother-daughter relationship confirmed. 99.9%. The room went silent. No sound. No breath. No world. For a moment, Madame Ioma did not move. Her mind refused to accept it. Then her body reacted before her pride could. Her lips parted. A small broken sound escaped her throat. And tears fell. Not controlled tears. Not quiet tears. Real tears. The kind that come from the deepest place in the soul. Was her daughter, her baby, alive, standing under her roof all this time? Madame Ioma pressed the paper to her chest as if she could hold the past back together. Her shoulders shook. She whispered into the emptiness. My God! Her voice cracked. She's here. 23 years. 23 years of regret. 23 years of silence. 23 years of building an empire to avoid the one thing she truly lost. And now, the child she mourned was not dead. She was not gone. She was real. Madame Ioma sank into her chair, crying like the woman she had buried beneath power. That evening she could no longer pretend. She called Mama Abe quietly. "Tell Awa to come to the living room." Mama Abe's eyes widened slightly. "Yes, madam." The living room was glowing softly under golden lamps. Everything looked expensive. Everything looked perfect. But the air felt heavy, like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. Madame Ioma sat stiffly on the sofa, the DNA paper folded in her hand. Her heart beat so loudly she felt it in her throat. Minutes later, footsteps approached. Awa entered. She was still in her uniform, her face calm but her eyes cautious. "Yes, madam," she asked politely. Madame Ioma stared at her. How had she not seen it sooner? The curve of her lips, the shape of her eyes, the familiar quiet strength. Awa stood respectfully, but something in her posture showed she already sensed something. Madame Ioma's voice came out trembling. "Awa!" The young woman sat slowly when Madame gestured. Silence stretched between them. The clock ticked loudly. Madame Ioma swallowed hard. Then she whispered the words that shattered the world. "You are my daughter." Awa froze. For a moment, she did not breathe. The words hung in the air like lightning. Madame Ioma's eyes filled again. She began, voice breaking. "I didn't know. I didn't believe. But the test." She held out the paper with shaking hands. Awa's eyes flickered toward it. She did not reach for it. She simply sat still. Then after a long pause, Awa spoke quietly. "I know." Madame Ioma gasped. Her whole body stiffened. "You knew." Awa's calmness cracked slightly. Pain entered her voice like water entering a broken wall. "The woman who raised me told me before she died," she said softly. "She told me my mother was powerful and afraid." Madame Ioma's lips trembled. Awa continued, swallowing hard. "I came here, not for money." Her eyes glistened. "I came because I needed to see something." Madame Ioma leaned forward, desperate. "To see what?" Awa's voice broke. "To see if you still had a heart." The words hit Madame like a slap. Her breath left her body. Suddenly, the strong woman collapsed. She slid off the sofa and fell to her knees on the marble floor, crying, begging. Not as a billionaire, not as Madame Okuri, but as a mother. "I never stopped loving you," she sobbed. "Not one day. I was afraid. I was young, my family pressured me. I made the worst mistake of my life." Awa stood trembling. Her hands clenched. Her voice came like a whisper filled with years. "You abandoned me." The words were soft, but they cut deeper than any knife. Madame Ioma reached out her arms. "Awa, please." But Awa stepped back. Tears fell down her cheeks now. Not loud, not dramatic, just painful. "I don't know how to forgive yet," she whispered. Madame Ioma's arms remained stretched into emptiness. "I dreamed of you," Madame cried. "I prayed for you." Awa shook her head. "And I grew up without you." Silence. 2 lives broken by one decision. Awa wiped her face. "I need air," she said quietly. "I need space." Madame Ioma's voice shattered. "Don't leave." But Awa was already walking away. That night, she packed her small bag, the necklace around her neck, her letters hidden inside. And before dawn, Awa left the mansion, leaving behind wealth, leaving behind answers, leaving behind a mother on her knees. And as the gate closed softly, Madame Ioma sat alone in the living room, the DNA paper in her hand, the silence in her house louder than ever. Because finding her daughter had been a miracle, but keeping her would be the hardest part of all. The villa became silent again. But this time it was not the silence of control, not the silence of power, not the silence of a woman who ruled her world like marble. It was the silence of loss. After Awa left, something inside Madame Ioma Okuri broke completely. The house was still spotless. The floors still shone. The staff still moved quietly. But the spirit of the mansion changed. It no longer felt like a palace. Felt like an empty shell. Madame Ioma stopped going to work. For the first time in decades, she ignored her ringing phone. Board meetings were postponed. Investors were confused. Grace tried to convince her. "Madam, the company needs you." But Ioma only stared ahead with tired eyes. "What is a company?" she whispered one night. "When your child walks away from you." Grace had no answer. Even Mama Abe, the old housekeeper, could only pray silently. Because no one knew how to fix a wound that had waited 23 years to reopen. Every evening Madame Ioma sat on the terrace. The Abuja breeze would blow softly, carrying the distant sounds of the city. Cars, laughter, life continuing. But in her own world time had stopped. She held the red pearl necklace in her hands like it was her last breath. Her fingers would trace the worn pearls again and again, as if touching them could rewrite history. Sometimes she whispered into the night, "Awa." Other times she whispered, "My daughter." And sometimes, she said nothing at all. Just silence. Weeks passed like that. The staff avoided her eyes. Grace spoke less. The mansion that once feared Madame now pitied her. Because the strongest woman in Abuja had become the weakest mother in the world. Meanwhile, Awa was gone. She stayed in a small church hostel on the outskirts of the city. Father Andre gave her a room without questions. He only said gently, "Sometimes, healing requires distance before it requires return." Awa tried to breathe. She tried to sleep. But every night, her heart carried the same storm. Anger, pain, confusion. And underneath it all, love. Because no matter how deep abandonment cuts, blood still remembers. She remembered Madame Ioma's tears. She remembered the way her mother fell to her knees. She remembered that broken voice. "I never stopped loving you." Awa wanted to hate her. But hatred felt too heavy to carry. She wrote letters she never sent. She walked by the river, staring at the water. And slowly, she began to realize something painful. Her mother was not only a woman who abandoned. She was also a woman who suffered. Awa had grown up without a mother. But Madame Ioma had grown up without forgiveness. Both of them were victims of the same past. One evening, Father Andre sat beside Awa quietly. "My child," he said, "what do you truly want?" Awa's eyes filled with tears. "I want peace," she whispered. "And do you think peace comes from running forever?" Awa didn't answer. Father Andre continued softly. "Forgiveness does not erase the past. It only frees the future." That night Awa lay awake. The necklace rested against her chest. The rain began to fall outside, gentle at first, then stronger. And in the sound of the rain, Awa heard something else. Not thunder, not storm, but a voice inside her heart saying, "Go home." Not because everything is healed, but because love deserves a chance. The next evening, Abuja was covered in dark clouds. The rain fell harder, washing the streets with silver. The Okuri mansion stood quiet, its tall gates closed like a heart that had given up hope. Madame Ioma sat on the terrace again, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The necklace was in her palm. Her eyes were distant. She looked older now, not because of age, but because of regret. Mama Abe approached carefully. "Madam, you should come inside. The rain is heavy." Ioma didn't move. "She will not come back," she whispered. Mama Abe's voice trembled. "Madam, God is the God of return." Ioma gave a sad laugh. "I waited 23 years once. I don't think my heart can survive another waiting." Mama Abe said nothing. She simply stepped back. And sound. The gate. Slowly opening. Mama Abe froze. The guards looked up. A figure entered through the rain. A young woman. No suitcase. No bag. Only the necklace around her neck. Madame Ioma did not breathe. For a moment she thought she was dreaming. Her hands trembled violently. "Awa," she whispered. The girl walked forward slowly, rain soaking her clothes. Her face was calm, but her eyes were full. Madame Ioma stood up, trembling like glass. They stared at each other across the wet courtyard. Rain fell between them like a curtain of emotion. Awa's lips parted. Her voice came softly, almost breaking. "I can't erase the past." Madame Ioma's breath caught. Awa swallowed hard. "But I don't want to live without my mother anymore." Madame Ioma's knees weakened. A broken sound escaped her throat. "Awa!" Slowly. She opened her arms. Not like a billionaire. Not like a powerful woman. Like a mother asking permission. For a second Awa stood still. The old pain rose again. The years lost. The childhood missing. But then, she stepped forward. This time, she didn't move back. She walked into the embrace. Mother and daughter held each other tightly. Shaking. Crying. Rain mixing with tears. Not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because love had returned. Mama Abe covered her mouth, crying quietly. Grace, watching from the doorway, whispered, "Thank you, God." Inside that embrace was not just reunion. It was redemption. And for the first time in 23 years, the Okuri mansion did not feel like a palace. Felt like a home. Sometimes life brings back what we thought was lost forever. Not to punish us, but to give us a second chance. Because even after years of silence, a mother's love and a child's truth can still find their way back home. If you watched this story to this end, please give this video a like. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next story filled with love, lessons, and unforgettable moments. Until our next story.